Responding to President Trump's 145% tariffs on Chinese goods entering the United States, a China customs official insisted the sky won't fall. Joining us to share his thoughts on Trump's tariffs on China is China analyst Gordon Chang, author of the book Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, and also the book The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, the CCP complains about the tariffs, but now they're downplaying them. Almost like Alfred E. Newman. What, me? Worry? So what's the truth here? I'm sure they're publicly putting on a good face, but they're deeply concerned about this. Why?
They're got to be deeply concerned because their economy already is probably contracting. And if it isn't now, it will be in a month or two. We see the price signals from March, which showed deflation in both the consumer segment and also in the factory sector. But also they're having their 2008 downturn now. In 2008, they didn't want to have a recession, so they overstimulated their economy. They took on an enormous amount of debt. They now got to resolve it. And all of a sudden, you have President Trump imposing tariffs for China's predatory and criminal trade practices. So all of these are hitting at the same time.
4 years ago, you wrote the book, The Coming Collapse of China. Could this be the moment? Is China about to collapse economically?
Yes, I think it actually could. Now, I was a little bit early in my prediction, but what we are seeing right now is basically the end of the economic model. The boom is over. China's leaders don't know how to deal with it. Xi Jinping reveres Mao Zedong. He's taking the country in the wrong direction, just as all of these crises are hitting. And also, China is looking at the world in very different ways than it did in, for instance, the beginning of the reform era at the end of the 1970s. Then China was reforming and opening up. Now it is doing the opposite of reform and closing down, and people are noticing. And so that's why you have the great pessimism in Chinese society. That's why we have more social controls. That's why we have a much more aggressive Chinese regime.
Investor entrepreneur Kevin O'Leary says Trump should continue to squeeze China, maybe even raise tariffs as high as 400%. Your thoughts on that?
Well, tariffs are now at 145%, except for electronics. At 145%, that's shutting out most Chinese products into the U.S. market. So whether we raise it to 400 or 4,000%, it probably doesn't have much of a practical effect. But what Kevin O'Leary is saying is that we should keep the pressure on until China makes a deal. Now, I don't think that Xi Jinping is in any mood to make a deal. I think he's more prepared to take his country off the cliff than actually do something which is economically rational, which is to come to terms with the U.S. But that's nothing that we can deal with. These are the problems in the Chinese regime itself. And the United States is just going to have to do what is best for Americans, protect our people, protect our manufacturers. And we just have to watch what the Chinese do for themselves, to themselves.
What are the consequences for the U.S.? Many Americans are worried about higher prices because we're used to cheaper Chinese goods.
Well, two things. First of all, in the first round of Trump's tariffs in 2018, China absorbed somewhere between 75 to 81% of the cost of that. Americans didn't feel those tariffs. This time, China has even more incentive to absorb costs, and we're seeing some evidence that it's already doing that. But also, we Americans have got to remember something. For decades, our presidents have pursued deeply misguided and injurious trade policies, and we're going to have to bear pain to get out of this. If we don't bear this pain, China is going to take over all of our manufacturers, and it's going to rule us. So the question is, do we Americans want to remain free and sovereign, or do we not? And so President Trump, whether people like him or hate him, he is the person who is going to save our economy and our society, and we need to support him at this critical moment.
The EU worries it will be flooded with Chinese products. So how concerned should our European friends be?
Very concerned, as well as our friends all around the world, because the products that China is not going to be sending to the U.S., they've got to send them somewhere. They're going to try and flood markets in Europe, Japan, in what they call the global South. These countries are going to erect tariff barriers of their own because they cannot afford to have China decimating their local industries. So China is in a very difficult position right now. We're seeing the export-oriented factories in the Pearl River Delta in the southern portion of the country. They don't have any orders. They're going out of business. They can't sustain themselves. But right now is a very difficult situation, not just for China, but for the rest of the world, because China has put itself into a position where there are no good outcomes for anybody.
Okay, so President Xi is likely to double down. So do you see this trade war evolving into a hot war, maybe over Taiwan, as China begins to collapse economically?
Well, it could be Taiwan, could be elsewhere. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen very provocative Chinese military activity directed against South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, and Australia. And that shows that Xi Jinping is lashing out. And he could very well decide that a war is his only option. And it wouldn't be to rally the Chinese people, Gary, because the Chinese people right now do not want war. But I think Xi Jinping might see war is in his personal interest because it would prevent other Communist Party figures from challenging and maybe even deposing him. So yes, the Chinese regime can lash out, and we need to be especially concerned, and we have to be prepared for anything.
Okay, Gordon Chang, China expert. Always a pleasure talking with you. We've been doing it for many years. We appreciate you. God bless.
Well, I appreciate the ability to talk to you, Gary. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.